One of the things that I think we struggle with at times as followers of Jesus is our relationship to the rules. There's this interesting example in 1 Samuel where Saul gets in a lot of trouble for offering sacrifices. He's not a Levite, and this is something that he shouldn't do. He should have instead waited for Samuel to offer those sacrifices. Now, the problem here is that Samuel's not a Levite either. He's an Ephraimite. And yet God makes an exception to allow him to enter the priesthood and act on behalf of the people in the nation. And I think part of our problem here is we think that these types of rules, actually all the rules in Scripture, are meant to bound God, or at least they do bind God. God must follow the rule if it's there in Scripture. When I think what we're seeing in this story is that the rules were always there to constrain or to limit the damage of our worst instincts. It's okay for God to break the rules. It's okay for God to bend the rules. In fact, sometimes it's necessary for us to do that as well, but only if we understand why the rule was there in the first place. And in this instance, the rule on who gets to offer sacrifices and who should stay very far away from that is in fact an incredibly important rule because of what it protects the people from.
You see, the reason that the priestly order was separated from the leadership in Israel, in particular this new category of king, is because God has always known that once religion and politics are commingled, it's always going to be religion that is co-opted. Do you remember when Israel trotted out the Ark of the Covenant and tried to strong-arm God into supporting their war, and God said, "I'm out"? Saul is doing it all over again here just a couple chapters later. These sacrifices are not meant to please God. They are meant to buy God. And I want you to see that the first thing the first king of Israel does is try to use religion to support his agenda, his assassination plot, his propaganda, and that itself is the problem in the story. The problem isn't just breaking the rule about who gets to offer sacrifices. Samuel himself is a break in the protocol. The problem is that the rule is there to protect the Hebrew people from the kind of manipulation we're seeing here in Saul's first steps as king. Faith is not about checking boxes. It never was. Faith is about slowly coming to understand what the rules teach us, how they guide us and shape us, how they disciple us and form us, even to the point when the rules themselves will show us when to break them and when to hold absolutely fast to them. And what's fascinating here in this book, in the life of Samuel, is that we've seen when to break the rules, and now we're seeing when to protect them. And the consequences of not knowing the difference. Near the end of his life, there's this moment where Jesus is with his friends. He turns to his disciples and he says, "Look, at some point after I'm gone, you are going to come face to face with how hard life and faith can really be. And you will have to bind yourself to new rules. You'll have to loose yourself from old ones. You will have to make choices for yourself. And the only way that you will do that well is if you can metabolize my teachings so deeply that they will flow out of you instinctively, because that's what it actually means to follow my way." And guys, the stakes will only get higher the more influence you have. Peter, this is as important as the keys to the kingdom of heaven, Jesus says. But what happens when the king, who is at the very top of that pyramid, doesn't understand the consequence of his choices? Well, do you remember the very first thing that God said when the people asked for a king? It's in chapter 8, verse 11. "He will take your sons and make them serve with his horses. He will run them in front of his chariots." And not only does Saul do that, it's the first thing he does, and he does it in the name of God.